Hi,
Hello, Allison. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Of
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for taking the time.
course, I'm happy to.
First,
Uh,
congratulations on Fellow Travelers. It was a wonderful series.
Thank you so much.
What can you tell me what drew you to the role of Lucy to begin with?
It was one of those like undeniable things. It's hard to describe, but in our line of work, sometimes there's something that feels like a little bit risky. You're not sure how it's going to go. Either it's a mixture of genres you're not used to, or maybe it's someone who's never directed something before. And so you're weighing a bunch of things. Basically, from the cover letter, just describing it, I was like, well, this seems awesome and important. And then the moment I started reading the script, I was like, well, this is so beautifully written and the story is beautifully told. And although I did have a moment reading, because I had seen that I was supposed to read for Lucy, I'm reading the pilot and it's like Lucy's late 50s. And I was like, oh, we're here. We're, we're here already. And that was fast. And then I read on and realized I'd also be in my 20s. But I just was I was drawn to every part of it. I was drawn to Lucy. I was drawn to the script, the story, the other characters, the time periods, the subject matter, the creative team involved. I mean, every single aspect of it. I was like, yes, I have to figure out a way to make this work. I
Was
feel
it
very honored.
was it offered to you? Was it something you had to audition for?
A little bit of both. I think I was an idea of someone they would want for a Lucy, and I also read with Matt. We did some scenes together via Zoom, which is a very, very strange
I'm
experience.
sure.
I think just to make sure, and Matt and I have known each other for years and we've wanted to work together for years. I guess there's always a chance that even two people who like each other and who independently are, well, he's very, very talented and I'm doing my best. And so even though, sometimes I guess the chemistry can just feel bizarre. I'm sure it happens. And so I guess that was a kind of audition, but I have since been told by Ron that after our initial coffee, at which point the role was not mine, I think he was like, well, I think that's Lucy. So I guess the way to put it is it was mine to lose.
Fair enough. Now, lying and specifically lying to yourself is a central theme in the series, and I think that applies particularly true of Lucy as well. Can you talk about that about a little bit?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things we talked about often through the course of working on the show was versions of knowing, like the types of knowledge that there are available to us in the world, and the deals we make with ourselves and with others, and explicit, implicit deals, and explicit, implicit truths. And so dialing up and down the various things that Lucy knows and the things she kind of knows was a really important part of playing this character. Has at least two men in her life who are closeted and gay and very important to her. And the extent to which she knows about each of them is a hard question to answer at any moment in the script, and one that we had to come up with answers for to inform the performance. But it can kind of go either way. There's very few frank like coming out conversations in the show. It's people who can kind of sense something about each other. And then the question is, what then? So even if there had been suspicions prior to getting married, it's kind of confirmed for her after that. But she asks herself, what is the more important thing in my life? What matters to me? And it was a family. And so in that way, whatever she kind of knows, she doesn't want to empirically know. And she does know that the things that she really wants is having children and having a family. And then the question is, okay, you make those deals with yourselves early on. How do those deals look 10, 20 years down the line? Do you still want the same things? Are you still the same person? And so I think all of the characters, the story is one of that. It's one of growing into deals you've made when you were younger and figuring out whether your clothes still fit or if you need something new. And I think Lucy's journey it's interesting to hear you say lying to herself because if anything, it was a lie of omission, but I think she kind of knows everything at all times in a way. And I think it's the weight of that knowledge that is so heavy for her to bear. And also, and not a choice she had. People couldn't live in their free expression of
Hmm.
who they were. So what was she gonna do? Out her brother or just sit him down at the table with the family and be like, just tell, like, are you gay? What's happening? That just wasn't the time they were living in. I know I now I've heard from a lot of women who had siblings or whose moms lived in that scenario and who watched that happen. And I actually think compared to the stories I've heard, Lucy and Hawk handled it kind of beautifully by trying to maintain their focus on what really, really mattered to them, which was their children.
Do you think, I mean, Hawk is portrayed as a pretty selfish character. Um, do you think Lucy's actions are equally as selfish or partially as selfish? Because she was doing it to, like, as you said, that she wanted a family.
Yeah,
Do you think there's some
totally.
selfishness in going through with this marriage that may or may not have been a facade?
Well, I think for Lucy, it was much more, she spent much more time considering what are my actions going to do to the people around me? How are they going to impact the people I love? Hawk spent very little time thinking about that. And at the end of life, wished he had thought about it much more, I think. Um, Not at the end of life, at the end of the show. And I think Lucy by the end realizes she had spent her whole life contorting herself to fit this narrative that just was so far from being real that she couldn't tolerate it anymore. Um, and while one could classify the choices she made as selfish, I ultimately believe that she does spend a lot of time suffering for what she believes to be the good of the family. Now, one could also argue just people living authentically and being happy as parents is a much happier household for kids. But that idea of staying together for the kids and creating this illusion of perfection and everything's fine for the kids would have definitely been what she felt was like the most selfless
Right.
strategy she could have deployed at that time.
How do you view the character of Hawk? Because I mean, he's the protagonist in this really decades-long love story, but
Yeah.
from Lucy's point of view, he's kind of the villain. So I'm wondering how you, as a performer, see the character.
Well, I see him as it's hard to understand their relationship without really thinking about their past, which is that he was just the like hot friend of her brother's that was like around occasionally and would be very exciting when he was at the house and was this very handsome guy and did everything right and her dad loved him. So I think the whatever exposure she had to him growing up was very like dreamy kind of. He was this mythic figure who was kind of godlike to her, I think. And I think over time, she just felt so much warmth towards his ability to make her dad feel calm, take care of his life, really be part of the family and be the brother in this way that sounds kind of incestuous, but be the son figure to her dad that her brother couldn't be. He just kept disappointing the family and messing up. And I think she saw in Hawk someone who knew how to do everything right. He was doing everything right. And yes, were there little voices in her head that said, why is he still a bachelor? This eligible, gorgeous man who is so good at everything he does. What is he doing still a bachelor? But she was still single. So in her mind, she probably just thought, we're both picky. We're
Right.
just waiting. Um, so I think she was madly in love with him. And actually, one of the things Ron Nicewarner always talked about being very, very important to the show was connecting to the love that the characters feel for each other. It's very easy in these stories to forget that there were like months and years of kicking off their heels in the front hall, lighting up a cigarette and watching a TV show together and sharing the cigarette back and forth or eating out of a pint of ice cream together. The two of them, I think, were extremely close and they went through some tragedy, which bonded them together on multiple occasions that we see in the show. And I think really solidified the relationship they had, even if it didn't look typical, or even if it didn't have all the outspoken truth in it. What
Right.
was very real for both of them, I think, deeply was this deep love and a shared love for family and for where they've come from. And just I see them as fellow travelers in a less loaded version of it, where they've literally traveled life in
Sure.
tandem. They've known each other since they were very young. They've walked the same path. They have all the same cultural references. They have all the same people in common. They can refer to people by first name, shorthand. I see that as a very harmonious, loving, connected relationship. And for Lucy, I cannot imagine the amount of pain having Hawk as a husband must have caused for her. The incredible pain of knowing that your husband has deep desires for people that are not you and whatever love he has for you, it exists in a different realm, in some exceptional realm that sure is just yours, but is not the way that when you grow up, you imagine being loved by your spouse. And unless that's something that she had been totally aware that she was signing up for, I can't imagine how that slow pain, once the hope is gone, that might evolve into something new. The pain of living in that truth every single day without addressing it must have been really, really, really hard.
You mentioned Lucy knowing and when she knew it. How did that affect your performance? I imagine that was difficult to keep track of within, I
Lots
mean,
of,
because I mean, you're shooting,
yeah,
I'm assuming you shot the series chronologically in order of episodes, but it's told out of sequence. So
yeah.
how did that affect you as a performer?
A lot. It basically just meant a ton of notes on a bunch of different chronologies. So I had one set of notes that was just chronological, like these are the events of Lucy's life on and off screen, it like told as a timeline. Then there was one that was here are the events of Lucy's life that we see on screen told in script order in terms of when we're going to see them on screen. And then here are the things that the audience knows in order of when they know it. And what does Lucy know? So it was just really, it was complicated, but it was, let's give this English major brain something to do. It was really fun. And ultimately the whole team, the whole creative team behind the show is was so aligned on every single detail of everything that if for a moment I had been playing a version of her that was in the 70s, even though I was in the 60s or the 50s, then someone would have picked up on it immediately. But also, you always know where you are in time and place because her look changed so much
Right.
over the course, and voice and body and everything. So all of that was part of the preparation of it, was to really distill who is this woman at this point in time. But yes, you've hit on something that was really complicated. And we didn't even shoot the episodes in order necessarily. We shot them in blocks. So
Okay.
yeah, that was the hardest part by far. But if that's the hardest part, this is a very, very fun job.
You mentioned you obviously play someone in her 50s. I thought they did a really nice job with hair and makeup without overdoing it.
So talented. So, so talented. Yes, Jordan and Michelle were brilliant. And Joseph, who did the costumes. I mean, I think it's a really hard thing to achieve because it's jarring either way. I'm sure if they had done photorealistic, completely accurate aging on all of us, it would have down to every single detail, it would have been too much. And if they hadn't done as much as they did, it would have seemed too little. And so it's about finding a happy medium that isn't necessarily real, but is what looks right on screen, knowing that what our audience is expecting. How much like disbelief are we hoping that people will be able to suspend? How much belief are we hoping people will be able to just suspend while they're watching the show? While they know, I know that's Allison Williams. There's this like magic trick that's happening on a screen, and we're hoping that people have lost track of us as humans and they're just seeing the characters. But I think they did an incredible job. It was all practical. I mean, for Lucy at least. One of the things I loved about really what Jordan emphasized in the makeup for the facial aging was breaking rules as a way of emphasizing mature facial features. And so we would do a little bit of creping on my eyelids, for example. And it's kind of a freaky process because it really just emphasizes what's coming. So you're kind of like, it's like a coming attraction. You pull all the skin taut, you apply this substance that's like glue basically, and then you let go of it and you put powder on it. And then you just see every single line start to emerge that you have in your face. And so that in and of itself is quite an experience. But then if you have a part of your face that has lines on it, one of the like makeup rule of thumb is you don't put anything metallic on that surface because it draws attention to it and the light will hit all of the creases. And so he applied metallic makeup onto the creases to help emphasize it. So rather than putting some heavy prosthetic on my eyelids, he just put the wrong makeup on purpose to help play into that. I mean, I learned so many things from the whole team. Everyone was so thoughtful in taking us up and down through time. I also got to play younger than myself, and the experience of taking off older makeup is very different from the experience of taking off younger makeup. One is met with relief and one is met with wistfully hoping to put the young makeup back on.
How did you approach your performance within each time period? Did you view the character differently? Did you emulate, were you trying to emulate different ages as in your performance?
I was. I worked with a dialect coach named Rhea Nolan, who ended up being also kind of like a spirit guide through Lucy's evolution. And I always work with an acting coach named Gina Ratton, who is super, super talented. And they both helped me kind of chart where she was in time as I was moving through it. And it affects everything. I mean, obviously getting older, and I have the weird, I don't know, ability to look at myself at whatever age from like 22 on, kind of on the record. So I can see this happen in real time, which is very strange. Your voice gets lower with age and things, your, I don't know, gesticulations change and your posture changes and your body changes and the speed that you talk changes and all of these things. And so we literally picked out notes on a keyboard for where Lucy's midpoint in her range was at any given decade. I also modeled her way of speaking off of a dear friend of my grandmother's, who has just the perfect voice. And I had to dial it back slightly because, again, it's so accurate that it would have sounded a little weird maybe to our modern ears. But using that and also adding a smoker's voice with time, allowing more gravel, the lower register as the years go on. Yeah, just decades of hardcore smoking. Like it's gonna do something. It's gonna impact your voice and the way you carry yourself. And keeping in mind that Lucy is someone who would have wanted to present very well at every point in her life. So it was kind of fun to play someone who just was always putting her best foot forward and trying to project the best version of herself in that way.
Before I let you go, I do want to let you know that when my son was very young, he was obsessed with Peter Pan Live.
Was he really?
Yeah, we watched it ad nauseum. So,
Well, I
and
have a toddler, so I can imagine how often that was. So I'm a little bit sorry for just like
oh no,
having
it
done
was
that too
wonderful.
much. But what that was so much fun. I'm so delighted to hear that he loved it. How great. That's like the
He was
best
in a Peter
compliment you
Pan
can give.
phase, so it came out at the perfect time, and we listened to the soundtrack. We watched it over and over again. So thank you for that.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. I was a true labor of love. It was one of the most incredible creative experiences I've ever had. It was, I mean, I got to fly and sword fight Christopher Walken. Like,
That's a good day.
that's
That's a good day
kind
at
of
work.
it. What else do you need to do?
Well, thanks again, and congratulations on the series.
Thank you so much. Tell your son, AKA Peter, I say hi.
Oh, will do. Take care.